Welcome to the worst nightmare of all. Reality.
I had gone to the shopping center that's about a 30-minute walk from my house. I had taken the bus up there, but it only stops at the shopping center once an hour. While I would usually take the bus home from the shopping center, the bus wasn't due for another 45 minutes by the time I had done what I needed to do, and my 10-year-old brother was at home alone. My mom has no problem with me leaving my brother home alone for an hour or two, because he can take care of himself for that long. So I decided to walk back to my house instead of waiting basically an hour for the bus. On my way home, I saw a man, maybe 40 to 45 years old, walking in the opposite direction. I was walking south and he was walking north. As he turned the corner to walk towards me, I got the impression that he didn't look quite right. Probably because as he was walking, he was just staring at me as he walked past me. I got a sinking feeling, like when you're on a plane and it starts to descend. As I continued to walk, it felt like someone was following me. So when I got to the bus stop, I made it look like I was checking the bus times, which gave me an excuse to turn around. Once I did, my heart started racing. This fucker had changed direction and turned 180 degrees to walk in the same direction as me. He was walking faster than he was before, and this freaked me the fuck out. I was close to the road that I would usually turn up to get on my street. I turned up the street and had walked about 25 meters up it when I heard the crunching of a chip packet I knew I had passed. He was still behind me. I decided I would cross the road to put more distance between us. From here, I could go a longer way home. This longer way had a lot of corners, making it more difficult to follow me. This street also had a lot of teenagers who were home due to the summer holidays, so if the guy tried anything, there would be a lot of people who would more than likely hear me screaming. Now you may be wondering, why didn't you call the police? I had been stupid and left my phone at my house, so I had no chance of calling the police while walking. Even if I could, I probably wouldn't, out of the fear of provoking something. While my weight is mostly muscle, I'm not large enough to take on someone who looked like they weighed twice what I did. So while I was taking the long route, I turned around and looked behind me. He was still there. This is where I started a plan to get back to my house. I turned the next corner and sprinted along the path as quickly and as quietly as I could. I was on my house's street. If I was going straight home, I would have gone left, but instead, I went straight ahead towards a small park that's just up the street from my house. The reason I did this was because I could go up through the park and around to get back to my house. As I was crossing the road to get to the park, I looked back and I saw him jogging up the path I had just come from. He saw me and started sprinting towards me. Luckily, I had a 150-meter head start. I ran through the park and up around to the left. The area behind the park is like a maze, so this gave me an advantage. Once I was behind the park and out of sight, I continued sprinting for a house that had an old shed in its front yard. The shed was empty and the door was open, as always. So I hid in there, able to look through a small window, and he was looking around for me. He then walked the way that I was planning on going to get back to my house. I was still too scared to leave the shed, so I waited for about 10 minutes. Before I saw him walking back towards the park on his phone, I heard part of what he was saying into the other end. Yeah, I lost her, but I think she lives around here. She's a crafty little bitch, though. After he passed, I waited another 10 minutes before leaving the shed and sprinting back towards my house. I called my mom, who called the police, who in turn called me. I gave a description of the man. I refused to leave my house alone for a week. I've never seen him again, and the police haven't come up with anything. My name is Angie, and I'm going to tell you guys one of the strangest things that has been happening for a couple of years now. I live in a small city, so nothing really ever happens around here. Maybe like one big thing happens every few years or so, but that's about it. When I was 11 years old, my parents decided to take my sister and I to a Star Trek convention. So I asked them if I could bring a friend. They said yes, so I brought my best friend, named Parker. When my parents brought him home, his parents started chatting with mine. It was dark outside, and only the moon was out, and Parker and I went to the back of his house. I might add, has no fencing, and neither did any of his neighbors, so we could see all of their backyards. Parker got a bad feeling, and got scared and ran to his parents, but I was a rebellious child. I stayed. About 5 minutes later, I look up and saw a man in one of the neighbors' yards, crouched over. It was dark, but from what the moon let me see, he was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. What struck me as really odd was his orange goggles, and he had something covering his mouth. It looked like a bandana. He looked to be in his late teens, but I'm not sure. I screamed out of pure shock, and he snapped his head towards me and then started to run at me. I turned around screaming, running towards Parker and both of our families. I told them everything, but they blew it off as my imagination. Parker went back there with me, and the man was gone. Later that night, I was in my kitchen drinking some water and spinning in my chair, when all of a sudden, I hear a tapping at the window. It was a slow, rhythmic tapping, like someone was trying to scare me. I look at the window and took off running to my parents' room and stayed there until they made me go back to bed in my room, which at the time I shared with my sister, who was 2 years younger than me. It was around midnight and I just couldn't sleep. My bed is right next to the window of the room, so I decided to look out the window. And the moment I did, I saw a man cross the street with his hood casting a shadow over his face, so I couldn't see it. I stared for a good minute. When I looked away for a split second, he disappeared. I was so creeped out, and I decided ice cream would make me feel better. So I went down into the kitchen and started eating some ice cream, and I started hearing tapping at the window again. I brushed it off as my paranoia making me hear things. Fast forward 2 years later, and I have my own room by now, and nothing has happened for a while, when all of a sudden every night I hear a loud tapping at my window, and I look to see if anyone is there. Nothing. This goes on for 3 months, and one night I'm working on my homework. I look out the window and see the same man with the orange goggles looking at me. He runs off after he noticed I saw him. To this day, I still haven't said anything to my family because they would call me possessed or crazy, but I still see that same man with the orange goggles around. It absolutely terrifies me, and I'm still having a hard time sleeping. Hopefully he leaves me alone. There's no place like home, right? Well, that depends on who you share your accommodation with. Sometimes we complain about housemates that don't wash their dishes or leave a mess in the communal space. My case was a bit different. I live with someone that's a bit more extreme than a lazy person. His name is James. At the time, he was 32 years old. A fatty, bald guy who used to smell of pepperoni pizza. He's been eating pepperoni pizza for months, the cheap frozen quality in packs of 3. Sometimes he would eat 3 pizzas one after another, never brushing his teeth. In fact, you could smell his breath from across the living room. He was a brilliant jazz pianist, and it was really cool jamming with him sometimes. I play guitar. The fun part was only in the music playing, nothing else, as his head was often above the clouds. There was a time where, here in England, Magic mushrooms were legal in places like Camden Town, London. You'd have been able to buy them almost everywhere. Even if they say magic mushrooms are safe, any drug abuse leads to some sort of dementia at the end. Our house is a bit away from transports and shops, so that most of the people who rented a room didn't stay for too long, just for the time being until they would find a better place. Also, the house was a bit old and smelly. However, this wasn't the only problem. James was so annoying. He would constantly ask to borrow money from the tenants and leave a mess everywhere around the house. I learned how to deal with him. If he would ask for money, I would say, "Later I'm going to the shop. I'll pop by the cash machine and get something." Then I would pretend to forget and find similar excuses to avoid just saying no. The rent was very cheap, and I would ride my bicycle everywhere I needed to go, so the location of the house wasn't really a problem for me. Things started to take the wrong turn when a couple of girls moved into the house. He would walk around the house naked, just covered by a towel, and accidentally drop it whenever he would meet them. He would just smile. The first time it happened, I laughed it off. Seeing the face of the girl totally embarrassed in front of this round, pink, bald, sweaty, hairless guy was too funny not to laugh at. But by the third time it happened, it started to get me pretty creeped out. It happened a few times when I was in the kitchen talking to my girl housemates. He would just walk in, drop his towel, smile, and then try to make conversation. But we would just leave the room feeling very uncomfortable of what we had just witnessed. It probably happened lots of times. I only saw it happening about 3 or 4 times. But that's not all. When the girls would literally run away when they saw him, he would chase them up the stairs and confess his love for them, which would creep them out even more. I can't imagine how disgusting it must have been for these girls to be tormented in this way. I'm not too sure when exactly I reckoned it was time for me to move out, but on one occasion while I was talking to my next-door neighbor, a very nice elderly lady, she told me that she once saw him dancing in the garden, doing some sort of ritual. He was completely naked, covered in engine oil, wearing a pair of knickers on his head, and singing some made-up Arabic song. I tried to reassure her, saying maybe he was doing a video, as he used to play around with an old Super 8 camera, but of course, I knew that he wasn't doing any video. He probably was just completely out of his fucking mind and trying to scare the neighbors with his weirdness. That was something I couldn't excuse or even laugh about, and alarm bells started ringing in my head. He wasn't just a pervert. He was fucking crazy. He had a cat, and this cat used to bring little bunnies inside the house. Of course, the bunnies would be badly hurt. That's what cats do. They don't kill or eat them. They just play around with those poor little creatures. I knew a vet that used to rescue bunnies for free. He had a garden full of them. But James seemed to love finishing the bunnies by snapping their neck and dumping them in a field near the house. In the field, there was a playground for kids, so I can imagine some of the kids would encounter some of these dead bunnies while walking in the park. He used to do a lot of stupid things like ask to borrow a lighter, light up his cigarette, and then pocket the lighter right in front of the person that he just borrowed it from. He was a complete embarrassment to have around, and a nightmare to live with. There are so many stories to tell, and they all happened in the course of 10 months, like the day I came back from the Glastonbury Festival, to find him naked, sleeping in my bed. I remembered shouting at him to leave my room, but he wouldn't. I was so furious that I called the police before I bashed him with a metal bar from one of the abandoned scaffolds in the garden. But guess what the police told me? Please note that it was 3 at night. They told me, "You both are adults. You should be able to deal with this peacefully." So, fuck the police. I started wrecking his room to get him out of mine, and it worked. Seriously, what would you have done? Cooking my own meal was always something I had to be careful of. I had to be present in the kitchen at all times, or he would just spoon the food straight from the pot into his mouth when I wasn't there. Taking a bath after he did was as disgusting as using the toilet after he did. I don't want to be too descriptive, but the bathtub was filled with pubic hair and brown spots of God knows what, and you know how disgusting it is to flush somebody else's shit. Now I live on my own, and I have absolutely no intentions to share my flat with anybody. I wish I would have been able to tell these stories better, but English is not my first language, and honestly, I would like to forget about this terrible experience. Allow me to give you some advice. If you need to share rent with someone, make sure it's not a weirdo.
Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please share, like, and comment, and become part of the Unity by hitting the subscribe button. If you have a scary story that you would like to share, be sure to send it to my email or post it on the free horror stories subreddit. Consider donating to this channel and be sure to follow me on Twitter. And until next time, stay spooky and never forget, there's always a reason to be afraid.
Could you imagine being one of those female housemates in the third story? Hey ladies, don't mind me. I'm just getting a glass of water. Oops, would you look at that, my towel just dropped. So what do you think, ladies? Do you think if I lost some weight I could become a male stripper? You know, I cover myself up in engine oil and dance around naked in the backyard. And it's pretty hot. So, you want to go on a date sometime?